Good morning, Lyshakil fifth graders. It's Mrs. Smith here, flying in from the magical kingdom of Ballston Lake. Happy Wednesday the 6th. Today you're going to listen to a fantasy story. You're going to identify some major events or plot points, and we'll figure out if they are real or not. The word plot. Now, at your level, as books are getting more complex, plots in fantasy books, probably any fiction books, might not be a straightforward, simplistic sequence of events. But be extra alert as a fantasy reader, because the plot of your fantasy book may consist of multiple problems and solutions and attempts at solutions. Number 2, the problems that we see are getting more complex. For example, they might relate to different times, different places, a magical place, a regular, ordinary place. There could be a loss of magical powers. There are many surprises in fantasy books. There could be flashbacks where the events happen out of sequence, going back in time and then back into present or future. There's adventures in fantasy, and when you think adventure, it's usually taking you to different settings, different places. I'd like you to just pause right now, go on up and get a pencil, notebook, or paper, and get yourself comfortable. Shake it out a little bit and settle in comfortably. When you come back, we're going to listen to Everella's Wand. Here we go. Everella's Wand. Notice it's in Newsy LA. That'll be important for our follow-up activity. You don't have to follow along with the text now, but I'll scroll anyway. Before I start, could you, on your paper, could you just jot down maybe a T chart with problems on one side and solutions on the other? And as I read, you could either keep a tally list, like a chart of if you hear a problem, you can draw a little tally mark. If you think you can keep up and jot down a couple of words, keywords to kind of keep up with problems and solutions, that's fine too. Might not be obvious clearly on the first read, but just something to keep yourself a little engaged. Here we go. Everella's Wand. Once upon a time, there was a fairy named Everella. After many failed attempts, she finally passed the wand test and was given her own wand. Prettier than a peppermint stick, said Everella. Her wand was long and straight and shiny, and it sparkled like diamonds at one end. Everella's new job was to keep the meadows decorated with wildflowers and the trees filled with singing birds. She'd point her wand at the grass, and, in the blink of an eye, bright flowers would cover the ground. When she pointed it at the trees, the trilling and chirping of bird songs would begin before you could say skylark. But one day, Everella said, "This is boring, and I'm hungry. I wish I had some chocolate." She pouted as she twirled her wand like a baton. On a whim, Everella pointed her wand at a clod of earth and said, "Sludgery fudgery, wouldn't it be dandy if this should turn into a piece of candy?" In an instant, a thick slab of chocolate walnut fudge appeared, lying on a paper doily in the grass. "Yum!" said Everella, and she gobbled it down. From then on, Everella forgot about the flowers and the birds. Pebbles became diamond rings, and leaves turned into frilly new dresses, all for herself. The flowers in the meadows faded away, and the trees became empty and quiet. One afternoon, Everella was fluttering around and searching through the weeds. She found a large stone, pointed her wand at it, and said, "Ugly old rock in front of my eyes, change to gold slippers, just my size." Then Everella looked down at the ground, puzzled. The stone was still there, but beside it lay one dirty old shoelace. "Something's wrong," she cried, and she looked at her wand. It was no longer shiny, and the sparkle at the tip was gone. She flew off in tears to find the fairy queen. "Your Majesty," sobbed Everella, "my wand needs fixing. It won't work." "I thought so," said the queen. "I haven't seen any flowers in the meadows lately, nor have I heard any birds." Everella's face grew red. Er, can you put a new battery in it?" she asked. "No," said the queen. "You must fix it yourself." "How?" asked Everella. "You must live for a time as an ordinary human being in the outside world. Nothing else will bring back the power," said the queen. Then she led Everella to the great door in the side of the fairy hill. The door swung open. "When you reach the village, ask for Dame Malkins, and take care of your wand," the queen warned, "for it is your only way back to this fairy hill." The door creaked shut. Everella sighed, then trudged off down the road. She was dressed in heavy dark clothes and thick shoes. Her wings had vanished, and her wand looked like an ordinary walking stick. When Everella reached the village, she saw a shop with the sign, "Dame Malkin's Bakery," painted above the door. Come in," said Dame Malkins, peering out. "I've been expecting you. Here, tie on an apron and start kneading this dough." Her wise eyes twinkled. Everella wondered how Dame Malkins had known she was coming, but she thought it was better not to ask. Every day, Everella worked from sunup to sundown, mixing dough, waiting on villagers, sweeping out the shop. Her hands became rough and red from doing dishes, and her feet grew sore because she was not used to walking. "If only I had a stick to lean on." Every night, Everella was so tired that she'd fall asleep almost as soon as she lay down on her cot. First, though, she'd anxiously check her wand to see if it had gotten back its power. But each time she picked it up, it was still just a stick. The days went by, more than Everella could count. Then one morning she woke up and heard Dame Malkins moaning, "Oh, my old bones, I can't get out of bed." Everella quickly made coffee and brought a cup to Dame Malkins, who said, "I could work if only I had a stick to lean on. Oh dear!" A stick to lean on? Everella wondered if she should let Dame Malkins use her precious wand as a walking stick. What if she leaned on it too hard and broke it? Everella could never go home. But Everella had grown to like and respect Dame Malkins. She had taught Everella many things and had worked hard beside her. She was always quick to share a kind word or a smile. She had become Everella's friend. At last, Everella said, "Here, take my stick." "You're a good girl," said Dame Malkins, and she hobbled out of bed to mix up a batch of rolls. All day long they worked together, with Dame Malkins leaning on the stick. The next morning, when Everella awoke, the stick was beside her cot. She reached out to touch it. Poof! There was a great flash of light. Everella found herself, sparkling wand in hand, fluttering outside the door in the side of the fairy hill. The door creaked open, and Everella slipped in. She noticed the flowerless meadows and quiet trees and said, "Time to get to work." If she did her job well, maybe the queen would let her visit Dame Mulkins now and then. The end. Okay. All right. Let me put this in present mode. You might maybe shake out your hands a little bit. Good listening. So while you read, I'm curious how many problem solutions you maybe tallied or jotted. I think I probably noticed at least 4 little sets of problem solutions. So what I'd like you to do is get that paper out. I'll get mine. And I already listed, in the sake of time, I listed down some events from the fantasy story Everella's Wand. So what I want you to do on your paper, you might need to flip over, is to, if you could make again, some sort of like a T chart or a 3-column chart, and then label event. Don't worry, I'm not going to have you write all that out. Just write event, real or fantasy in the middle column, and how I know. Okay. So event, could you just write the number 1 in your chart? You don't have to write the whole thing. It would take you forever. Everella's wand turned objects into what she wished. Okay. Come on over. Realistic or fantasy? I'm pretty sure we're going to list that as fantasy. I'll let you put in the how I know at the end. So let's move down to number 2. Final wish wasn't granted. The gold slipper, the rock into the gold slippers. So put number 2. You don't have to write that out. Move over, and are you thinking fantasy? Yeah, fantasy for that one. That there. Okay. Number 3, sent to live in ordinary world. So I'm going to put a number 3 there. Now, what do we think this is? Fantasy. Yes. I heard someone say that. Number 4, worked in bakery kneading dough. I'm going to put a 4 there. Are you thinking realistic on that one? Yeah. That's a realistic type of a thing. Working in a bakery. Number 5, Dame Mulkins lay sick in bed. Older woman, sick in bed. I'm going to call that realistic. Stick turns to wand. Number 6. No brainer, fantasy. Okay. Why don't you pause there and fill in the how I know column. When you're done, unpause. Back again. All right. Pretty simple to figure out how you know a wand turning objects into what she wished is fantasy. It's wands don't turn items into jewels. Number 2, final wish wasn't granted. Kind of the same thing. Stones don't turn into gold slippers. Sent to live in ordinary world, fantasy. How do you know? Well, I put down doors in fairy hills don't open up and lead to villages. Okay, as far as the next two, realistic, how do you know? Bakeries exist. We have bakers in the world, something like that. Dame Mulkins lay sick in bed. Well, older people sometimes have aches and pains and get sick. Stick turns into wand. Again, it's kind of like number one. Items or objects don't just metamorphize, change from one substance into another. It's just not a provable thing that happens in life. Unfortunately. That'd be really cool. Okay, finally, we're going to get you into Newsy LA, where you're going to find this story. And why I have this here is that Newsy LA, when you finish, you read the story, and you'll have activities to do. One of the activities is a writing activity that says summarize Everella's wand. And then you're going to answer and take a quiz, a 4-question quiz, which at this point, all your notes, all we've done, you're going to get 100 on that. Summaries. So with plot and events in the story, keeping track of them, and you guys are going to be reading chapter books. So there's a lot that goes into that. Each chapter has events in them. But when we write a summary, summaries are very short. So it's not, if you were to write the whole story down of what you read, that's more of what's called a retell. You'd retell it for someone else to enjoy it the way you did. A summary is just a real short couple of sentences. You might have, I want to give you a couple tips here before I send you on your way with the assignment. You may have, I'm sure you've encountered the somebody wanted but so then, that type of thing, to help you get the main points of a summary. I have something pretty much like that, but as we discussed earlier, plots are getting more complicated. So this little summary frame, you don't have to take it literally. It just kind of helps you get through and remember to hit on some of these major points. Okay, so we have somebody in a setting, had to, tried, but, okay. And that's getting to your characters, your setting, and your plot right in there. Just those little keywords. So what I had down here, Everella, so I looked at the somebody, Everella lived in a fairy world. Okay, so I used the somebody, I just substituted her word in and where she lived. Had to. I did actually really use these words, had to, tried, and but. She had to use a magical wand for adding flowers and birds to the meadows. I should have put. She tried to use the wand for selfish reasons, like jewels, but she was caught and sent to work and live as a regular person. Okay. If I were to continue this summary, I'd probably have 1 or 2 more sentences about maybe the theme or a lesson she learned or a character trait. Okay. From this point, you will be following the directions in your Google Classrooms, going to Newsy LA and finishing up, giving Everella's Wand another read, and the writing, the summary writing, and the quiz questions right in there. All right. So, in conclusion, the fantasy genre is wide-ranging. We can have, as you could see from Everella's Wand, the chart we just did, many of the events in Everella's Wand were fantasy. So that is more of a stronger fantasy story. There are things labeled in the library fantasy because it has just one or a few elements of fantasy in it. So you do have to just bear that in mind. Remember, Mrs. DJ talked about low and high fantasy. Nice job listening today, everyone. Thanks for your attention and look forward to seeing your work in Newsy LA. Bye, everyone.